Fellow Yongrae from Science and Technology Policy Institute in Korea. He will talk about global status of global biocluster and role of Seoul. So please, Research Fellow Yongrae, please take the stage.
네, 오늘 좋은 말씀 해주시겠습니다. 발표자 등단하고 계시는데요.
So please welcome the speaker. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Yongrae from STEPI. I would like to thank KHIDI and Seoul Metropolitan government for inviting me to this forum. I'm not an expert in bio industry. I'm somebody who studies policies for science and technology, but I've recently written a paper related to biocluster, and I was asked to talk about that in this presentation. Boston biocluster is probably the most promising cluster in biomedical industry. Kendall Square, which was empty space in 1980s, has been turned into probably the most innovative 1 mile on the earth. Bioclusters need certain factors to be successful as a global biocluster, and we will look at some of the successful global biocluster cases and also review the current status of Korea and what kind of preparation the city of Seoul needs to make. Recently, biocluster has received a lot of spotlight as a policy. The press has continuously featured stories related to bioclusters. In July this year, President Yoon has visited one of the bioclusters, and he has pledged his support for related policies. And in September last year, there was the second administrative decree issued by the Biden administration following the semiconductor industry. They are now developing a system for biomedical industry as well. Bioclusters. For biocluster, you need to hedge risks appropriately because each R&D project is very high in risk. So being able to manage risk and business complexities could be a very important challenge. So biomedical industry definitely needs clusters, but it has three major problems. First, inside biocluster, or it could be an intra-cluster problem, and there is the intercluster problem. And third, these two problems are mixed together to create national plan problem. For clusters to be successful, intra-cluster should be the starting point of any discussion. After the national plan is established, it might be too late for local clusters to react. So it is better to deal with the local issues first and do the assessment of the local issues and scale out to reflect that in national policies. So I would like to start my presentation with three questions: why, what, and how. Why do we need clusters in bioindustry? Second, then, what are the biggest challenges of bioclusters home and abroad? And how? What kind of preparation should the city of Seoul and the government of Korea should make? So let me talk about why we need clusters.
볼 수 있겠습니다.
Related to motivation. Bioindustry, as you're well aware, Well, we talk about bioeconomy, and there's a strong demand for bioindustry these days. The characteristics of bioindustry first is R&D. R&D can directly be translated into commercial opportunities, but each phase of R&D is heavy with risks. But throughout this R&D process, there are certain points in which we can achieve economic benefits. Third, existing IT technologies, when they are converged with bioindustry or bioindustries converged with existing industries, they could create a new fusion industry. So bioindustry has huge and many risks. So that is why cluster approach is most adequate for bioindustry. Then what is a cluster? I will share some literature review with you about bioclusters.
성공 요건이라든지
Success factors and development phase of clusters. I have done some basic review. And then based on that, I have studied why we need bio and clusters need to be combined together. First, local government can take the initiative of developing the cluster in that area. We can create the basis for resolving low birth rate and aging of the population. Cluster approach could be a lens for filtering out policies. And bio, we believe, is the best industry or most suitable for clusters. This is the point line space concept of bioindustry. As you can see in the left-hand chart, business experience can come together to create a line, which is a system. And with that system, the entire business plan can be created. And that would be the business approach to bioindustry. And I have tried to reinterpret that into policies. Local government initiated cluster. Well, clusters can be seen as intra-clusters, and clusters from different regions being linked will form intra-cluster, which is the line. And for national plan, the lines and dots will come together to come up with national biomedical industry basic plan. So line, dot line, space would be the new interpretation for cluster-based approach. Private sector or plus public sector related bioclusters, I will share some global studies with you. So case studies from home and abroad, and I will analyze their current status. Private sector clusters, I have shared some UK and the US case as private sector led. As for public sector led projects, I would like to share Japan and Singapore. But I wanted to include Basel here, but the next speaker will talk about Basel in detail, so I have decided to skip that here. So UK, US, Japan, and Singapore. So the strong players in these areas have come together to create a cluster. In Singapore, they have biocluster police. Boston cluster, well, you might be familiar with this, so I won't go into the detail. The most important characteristics is from the dot line surface area. The dot here would be the competency of intra-cluster, and it has very high competency. In line perspective, biotech companies are outstanding. Biotech companies are being sucked into this intra cluster because it's highly competitive, and there has been a lot of support by the local government. So each of these success cases were later reflected in the national plan, and the national government executed investment for this plan. This is a UK case, which can be seen as a dot line surface case, and Japan, as you can see on the right-hand chart, RIKEN, which is a public R&D institute, and Osaka, Kobe has their own organization, and they came together to create a stem cell for IPS, induced pluripotent stem cell. This case leveraged the original strength of the region and combined that with that of other regions, like a line, to create competitive cluster. Singapore case was also led by public sector. Science Park is well known around the world. This is also dot line surface type of project. And I have shared 4 overseas cases. So as for domestic cases, for clusters, I could identify 7 clusters operating in Korea. So National Food Cluster, National Science Business Belt, AI Cluster, National Innovation Cluster, and Advanced Healthcare Complex. And in the left-hand chart, there is the R&D complex, Innopolis. Many Innopolises are leveraging the competitiveness of the region for the industry, and one of the popular sectors was the bio industry. So far, we have 14 complexes that are operating around the Korea, including Innopolis, bioclusters. Over the past 40 years, I have studied how the policies has changed over the past 40 years. This is the chronological history of related policies. Left side shows the major events and policies for bio industry. In 1943, we came up with the basic plan for promoting the growth of biomedical industry. Now the plan is about to be revised for the 4th time, and each administration had different keywords for clusters. Kim Dae-jung's government was the first government who wanted to invest in sort of clusters or venture capital. Biocluster promotion and legal framework, hospital-based medical cluster, and cluster hub. These were the popular keywords used so far. The Yoon administration is trying to expand regional infrastructure, focusing on data and fusion. So this is the first year for establishing the 4th plan, and we have not developed the final version. But according to the draft version, Korea bio-globalization would be the keyword, and cluster is definitely being emphasized more. Until the 3rd revision of the plan, the focus was on developing the infrastructure and stabilizing the infrastructure. And related government ministries, I have identified 3 points from the related documents. It is to strategically grow the clusters and expand support for clusters and integrate and connect clusters. So the government ministries of Korea are basically working for 3 functions. Domestic bioclusters, they are spread across the country, carrying out different sets of activities. But one question we had now is, As for the statistics or numeric information that have been publicized, we wanted to develop them into some kind of quantitative numbers for assessment. So we wanted to identify which region had what kind of strength. And we analyzed that, and we added that with red bio, green bio, white bio, and also blue bio, which is the marine-related bio. So we matched that with this classification, and we have created a bubble chart based on the data that we had. Unlike what each region is saying, based on our basic analysis, some regions that say they are strong in medical device and other regions say they are strong in hospitals. So they are emphasizing their own unique strength, but based on our analysis, they were more or less the same. Each region did not have this specific strength. Certain region actually began to see decline in the related number of companies. So the region has a catchphrase, but they are not walking the talk at the moment. So they're saying they're strong in certain areas, but the evidence or data doesn't prove that. One of the encouraging signs we found out is that based on X concept of dot, line, and surface, Hongneung supercluster is surrounded by many R&D centers like KIST, Korea University Hospital, Gyeonggi University Hospital, so they can have easy access to high quality talents. And based on such excellent infrastructure, they can connect all the related superclusters across the region, create sort of a demo day event. So supercluster in Hongneung is probably a model case for leading the efforts in this area. And Hongneung supercluster has excellent infrastructure, and Hongneung is located in Seoul, so it can draw on the strength and benefits offered by Seoul. It could also identify triggering points based on which we can connect multiple superclusters, and many related activities are taking place. When we heard the voices of the people, many experts have shared their quotes with us. Lack of blueprints, no collaborative work, no national level support. Given all of this and analyzing the cases from home and abroad, we can conclude that each region does not have differentiated strategies, and there is a lack of collaboration and lack of national level plan. So if we can interpret that, we can come out with new set of policy recommendations. Strategy 1, 2, 3 can be identified. Strategy 1 is like dots. Each individual clusters can work on building their own core competency and competitiveness. Second would be the lines, the strategy 2 that connects the dots. And we will be creating a space which could be a national plan. So this is intra-cluster, inter-cluster, national plan, dot, line, and space. Then what kind of preparation should the government and the Seoul Metropolitan government should make? Task 1 for strategy number 1 would be to carry out various activities to enhance the inherent competitiveness of the individual clusters. They first have to identify their core competency area, where they're strong, where they're lacking in. They need to have an assessment of their own strength and weakness, and based on that, they can ask the central government for funding using specific evidence. Without evidence, it's hard to convince the government to give you the support because the government does not want to be reckless in their spending. Second is related to regulation for bio industry. There should be legislative support for clusters and interclusters. They can share some of the common equipment or common facilities. And as for collaboration with different regions, the central government should be interested in helping the region to tackle their own challenges, especially for bio industry. High risk and high return projects can be started by the government. That would be a great incentive for different clusters to come together. The central government, when they invest here, they can think more about how to get the different clusters to come together. And the U.S. Department of Defense, they have DARPA project, and they have Alpha H or Alpha B project in the bio industry. I would like to suggest make that kind of proposal. Hongneung was one of the case that I've mentioned before. This was related to a intercluster activity. So inter clusters can be reflected at the national plan. Having a top-down approach, having the national plan first is not the right way. It should be bottom-up. The local government should first develop their own plan. And as I said, we are developing the draft for the 4th revision of this plan. And biocluster is emerging as a very promising area. So the importance of policies for the industry will always be emphasized more. And as for dot line space, when we look at overseas case, PT, IT conversion, or national level support are being adopted by many countries. And we certainly found many relevant cases overseas. This is an area where we need to continue to identify, analyze policies, and also identify statistical data as well. Last but not least, regarding R&D, one of the keynote speakers has said that when R&D stakeholders get together, it is important to get the policymakers involved as well from the very beginning of the planning phase. And Director Maeda has said that business development is really important for planning, and instead of just bringing in the R&D experts, it's important to bring policy experts together. For example, if the Seoul Policy Institute can work with the national plan, that would be great. And as for the future direction of bioclusters, this dot line space clusters, if we can call that first layer, then on top of that, we can have a second layer, having these 2 layers. Like the second layer could be more mobile, more agile entity to enable the first layer using their own local strength. And with that, I think we'll be able to implement successful policies. And these local level networks can
role. The number of the review done by the DRB is skyrocketing, as you can see here, especially last year. And this year, it didn't actually drop, but the data was gathered up until September. So if we gather the information until the end of December, probably the number will still be on the rise. And personally, I think this is a quite preferable trend, but from the agency organization's point of view, it's quite concerned. It can cause some concern because of the data governance issues. And the foremost reason is because of the third-party provisions of the data, which means that there is a privacy issues. It has a risk of protecting the privacy, especially when we gather the patient's information. Are we sure to protect their private information? Because of that, the approach that we take in Korea is usually more putting red tapes or regulations. Of course, the hospital would like to use more of these patients and still stick to the regulations. And I can assure you that the hospital's point of view is that we are working hard for the privacy protection information. The second issue is the IP, intellectual property right issue. And in discovering new drugs, for the product that they develop, of course, IP, they have the concerns, but in case of the hospital, they gather the raw data, so there are some sensitive issues. And because of that, this is not an issue or challenge limited to one researcher or one agency, but there is the issue of the responsibilities. Who will take the responsibilities? That is why it is heatedly being discussed. And by having a cooperation with the hospitals in carrying out joint research, the agency's organization policy must be well understood. You need to identify what are the policies of the agency. That's the message that I want to give you. Another change that we have witnessed is that, unlike in the past, mostly the professors or expert working in the academia, the role was just advisors. They formed the consultative body and then they just gave advices. But the new trend is, as you can see, they opened their new company. And even as an outsider director, they work as a joint new startup companies, or they form a joint venture companies. They become a CEO. Because of that, there's an issue of the conflict of interest. And the agencies or the organizations are keenly interested in the COI. And in case of Korea, COI is comparatively speaking, compared to other countries or advanced countries, it's not that high. But when I talk to professors or experts, especially when we invite foreign speakers, most of them disclose. Before they begin presentation, they say that I take part in certain pharma's clinical trials, or I have these relationships. So they always have disclaimer. But in case of Korean professors or experts, they say that I don't have any conflict of interest, or they are hesitant to disclose their conflict of interest. And most of the companies, they don't want to disclose their relationship, and probably they are insensitive about these issues. One of the incidents that happened in August this year, there was a doctor or professor who was a PI in one of the clinical trials, but also he worked as a director of one of the startup company, and there was a conflict of interest. And for the company, it can give a huge damage. So in case of United States, they make sure that these doctors or professors don't take in part of the clinical trials because of the COI. And in case of professors, in Korea, they are not very crystal clear about this COI. But I hope that companies must understand about the issue and challenge of the conflict of interest. And when the researchers or when the medical doctors take part in the clinical trials, they have to make sure that whether there's any conflict of interest. If they work as a PI, and if they are working as the directors of these startup companies, then there are definitely a conflict of interest. Since I'm talking about COI, let me tell you more about conflict of commitment, or COC. What is COC? It's related to the proportions of the effort an employee allocated between the extended activities and also professional duties or responsibilities. If you spend more time doing the outside work, there's the issue of the conflict of commitment. Traditionally, when you talk about professors or working in the academia, everyone allowed and thought that professors can freely take part in outside activities, but as time goes by, more and more concerns are expressed over the professors' activities. In case of Korean organizations, especially the government agencies or government officials, if they spend too much time doing outside work, then the conflict of commitment issue is always raised. So please remember these issues. Lastly, I want to say a few words about patient centricity. On behalf of hospitals, when we work for the clinical trials, we must keep in mind that patients are our foremost priority. I briefly show you the US FDA guideline, which emphasizes the importance of the patient safety, remember? So once again, patient should be our foremost priority. If patient centricity becomes clearer and if we put more weight on the patients, then everything comes crystal clear. However, the reality in Korea, of course, the doctors, they carry out the medical activity thinking about the patient. So they don't consciously or intentionally think about patients because they believe that it's obvious things, but it tended to be the fact or reality that some of the medical or healthcare professionals put a light or neglect the patient centrality. And let me talk more about the patient-focused drug development. FDA has been active in focusing on the patient-focused drug development. That is why they came up with a guideline. And since we're talking about the commercializations of the drug, here, the key players should be patients. We need to collaborate with the patients, and we need to incorporate the patient's voice in drug development and evaluate their benefits. This is my last slide. So once again, let me go back to my main gist. What are the key drivers for R&D? First, commercial potential. Second, unmet medical needs. So if you're working at the pharma or companies, or if you work at the academia, I believe the foremost priority should be collaboration. As I mentioned before, there are numerous challenges and we need to consider that, and we need to join hands to overcome these challenges. That concludes my presentation. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Once again, Dr. Joonwoo. Well, let me introduce the last speaker of this session 1.
So, Head of Innovation of University of Basel, Mr. Schneider, will be making the next presentation titled The Basel Life Science Innovation Ecosystem Connecting to Korea. Please welcome him with a big round of applause.
Hello, everybody. So we are here. First of all, I would like to thank the Seoul government for having us here at this conference, for the organization, also the KHIDI and also the Seoul BioHub for having us here. And it's really great to be in Korea. I used to live in Korea for 5 years before and worked at the Swiss Embassy, so I'm really, really happy to also be back in Korea now for my role in Basel and to keep connecting these two countries or these two ecosystems together. And I'll actually talk about that quite a lot. We are here, also you can see quite a few people from Basel that are here, and it's actually mostly some startups in various stages. So some are quite early stage, and then some are a little bit more advanced. And we will have, after me or after lunch, Maria Plodinec, the CEO of KHIDI, speaking. And I encourage you all to follow this speech, because this is really a brilliant startup from Basel that will tell you a lot about cancer diagnostics afterwards. But first, I take a few steps back, and I would like to actually echo a little bit the STEPI presentation also that we heard before, to talk about ecosystems, innovation ecosystems, life science ecosystems, what makes them successful, and a few aspects related to this. And actually, I would like to take a sort of a bigger global view to ecosystems, and I'd like to start on the left, because actually we have a really challenged planet right now. We have a really challenged planet right now. We really have a lot of problems, we have to say this. For example, we have the climate crisis, we have a global pandemic which is still with us. We have high burden of disease, still a lot of people are dying from different diseases. We have increasingly resistant pathogens also emerging. Yesterday there was a conference, the Swiss Korean Life Science Symposium, where we focused also on antimicrobial resistance, huge challenge. Then also emerging mental health crisis, I think, also tied to the pandemic, but not just. And then also an aging society. So we really have a lot of challenges, and also many countries actually share these challenges today. And I would argue that in order to address these challenges, we need to work together in ecosystems. And if you look a little bit in the middle, what I propose is that we sort of subdivide life science ecosystems into 3 different sub-ecosystems. So that's on the one hand in blue, the knowledge ecosystem. So that is academia, research, with the motivation to generate new knowledge and technologies finally. Then we have business ecosystems. Business ecosystems create customer value at the end, bring a product to the market, and are very, very good at that. And then we have also innovation ecosystems that sort of merge this a little bit, but mainly focused on startups incubation, and so on and so forth. And I would argue that in order to reach a healthy society and planet, we would actually need to integrate these ecosystems together, and the innovation will be much more impactful if there's collaboration between these ecosystems. So, for example, a business can bring a product to the market, yes, even by itself, just doing research, but I would argue that innovation at the end will be much more impactful if there's collaboration between knowledge, innovation, and business ecosystems. And this is following a concept by a Finnish researcher, Katri Valkokari, and we actually actively collaborate with her also to develop this concept a little bit further and also to test it in action. First, I would like to focus, I will now talk a little bit about these 3 ecosystems, and first I would like to start with life science business ecosystems, and of course I'll focus a little bit on Basel once in a while, and I'll go a bit more in depth later on, but first a little bit more a big picture view. So you can see that there is a little bit of a shift. So on the left you can see different companies, so globally leading pharma companies are spending a lot of money on R&D. It's really, really big sums, amazingly big sums. We have the 2021 figures here. Leading is Pfizer, then immediately Roche, and so on. You can also see Novartis, another Swiss company, and J&J, which also has very strong activities actually in Switzerland. And you can see also in the second column, R&D as percentage of revenue, so as a factor, how much do these companies spend in terms of R&D compared to their revenue. So the higher it is, of course, the higher they focus on R&D. And Roche is leading in this with 27%. It's a huge sum. These are figures from 2021. However, what we also see is that even though these sums are really, really high, what we see is that sources of innovation are increasingly external. And for pharma companies, this is following a publication from Deloitte. Pharma companies, more than 2/3 of projected revenue from new drugs come from external sources, or will come from external sources. And that is through mergers and acquisitions, so the buying of startups or the buying of other companies, and also through partnerships with research. So this tells you that 2/3 is really huge, and it's really important to understand this, that for big pharma companies, even though they spend a lot of money on own R&D, partnering is really a matter of survival in the future. And you can see here, this is a photo of the Roche campus in Basel, and of course we collaborate a lot with Roche, for example. Then, as we go on to talk a little bit more about these partnerships and how pharma companies partner with other partners, such as researchers and startups. This is what some call open innovation. There are different terms, of course, to use. And this is following a publication by Schumacher et al. And this is actually co-published by a Novartis researcher. So somebody from Novartis published this. And I would highly recommend everybody to look this up and actually have a look. It's ranking all the leading pharma companies and in terms of how they interact and how they do open innovation. And it's telling us that almost all of leading pharma companies are either they have their incubators or they do public-private partnerships for certain disease areas. They do M&As, of course, and they even have academic centers of excellence, really deep in science. And they have their own VC funds. So you see, what I would like to say with this slide is that there's a paradigm shift in pharma R&D towards much more engagement with startups and with basic research. In the knowledge ecosystem, now we make a jump to the knowledge ecosystems, to universities. And you can see on the left, I put a little bit to show tradition. This is my employer, my university. A few years ago, when the university was founded in 1460, it's the oldest university in Switzerland and one of the oldest in Europe. And back then, the university's main role is really teaching knowledge to specialists. And then more and more, of course, it became also research, excellent research, shown here by sort of Nobel Prize and really researchers that you might know from Basel. So it's our Nobel Prize laureate Werner Aber in 1978, and then below famous mathematicians, the Bernoulli family, and also Leonhard Euler. But however, in recent years, from a university's point of view, also the role is changing a lot, I would say, towards an entrepreneurial university. And universities do this through, a little bit formally, it was more called a technology transfer. And nowadays we're moving more towards knowledge transfer, entrepreneurial activities. And leading universities today all promote knowledge transfer through the formation of startups. They have their own VCs. Not many universities, but the leading ones, they do have that. And they collaborate all with industry. Then we move to the innovation ecosystem, and there we can also really see, and this is not just a Swiss phenomenon, this is also, I know this happened in Korea, really in the last few years, really an explosion of activities in startups, in incubators, in venture capital that moves into startups. And I just exemplify this here with the statistics from Switzerland, where you can see that in in 2012, until about 2018, you can see the invested capital in Swiss startups was not even $1 billion per year, so really not that much. But in recent years, from 18 to 2021, it's really exploding. And it's exploding in terms of amounts, but it's also exploding in terms of the funding rounds. So you have higher money invested, but also more rounds and more startups founded. And I know in Korea, the numbers, I think, are a little bit higher because the country is bigger, but this just exemplifies that startups worldwide are really taking off. Now, I will focus a little bit more on Basel, and I will introduce to you the Basel Life Science Hub or cluster, or however we want to call it, just briefly, a little bit more from a company's point of view to begin with. So in Basel, it's a relatively small city with only about 150,000 inhabitants. So it is like a Gu in Seoul, or not even, I think. But we have 800 life science companies in Basel. And we have 31,300 employees in the life science industry. Also, that as a number doesn't sound that enormous, but then when you compare it with the actual population, it's actually really enormous, because it's 7% of all jobs in the Basel region are in life sciences. And that's a world record. Nobody even comes close. Boston, for example, which we saw Kendall Square before, is 1.7%. So the focus in Basel on life sciences is just really, really high. And it's not just a lot of people working on life science, they also bring out good results, as you can see in the patent statistics here, where we are second place worldwide and double the amount of the whole of Switzerland. As you know, Switzerland is also a very innovative country per se, but within Switzerland, Basel is really the hub for life sciences, the clear #1 hub. And you can see here, bottom left is the Novartis campus. It's like a city in the city with 10,000 people working there. You can see the Roche campus. This is still a model they're building. The 2 towers are now built. The third big one is almost finished. It's an R&D center. And you can see how dense it is. But it's not just these two companies. I really want to emphasize that. Everybody always just talks about Roche and Novartis in Basel, but that is not everything that we have. We have, for example, Idorsia, a very innovative biotech that just came out on the market with a new drug against sleeping disorder. We have Johnson & Johnson with a big operation in Basel. We have Lonza, it's very famous, became famous also as a producer for the Moderna vaccines. Moderna has the European headquarters in Basel. Then Bayer has 8,000 people working for Bayer in Basel also. We met the CEO recently. DSM is a Dutch-Swiss company, more in nutrition, food and vitamins. It is also present in our cluster. And then the Syngenta group, more agri-tech, has its headquarters in Basel. And Straumann, to take an example, from medtech. So you really see it's broad and it's really very strong, and we have great companies. And they also have nice buildings. So it's also nice architecture for those who enjoy it. Then to move to the university, just briefly, you can see here, this is also, I have 2 offices. This is one of my offices. It's a really nice view from there, from the 10th floor. This is the Biozentrum building. It's a research building that's brand new, was opened 2 years ago. But we don't just have new things, so we have new things and tradition. As I said, 1460, our university was founded. It's a comprehensive university with a university hospital, very similar to Yongrae or Seoul National University. Here, a little bit smaller, 13,000 students and 7 faculties, and we are normally ranked among the world's top 100 universities. A bit more information about our university here. As I said, it's not 550, it's more than 560 years now. We have to update this. 7 faculties, 13,000 students, but what I want to draw your attention to is really the 22.7% of these students are PhD students And that is really, really high. That is really, really high. That's in Switzerland, that's #1. So it means our university is really very, very active in research. And that is because we have this focus on life sciences. We are also #1 in third-party funding of any university in Switzerland, so it means our professors are really good at attracting competitive grants, be it from Swiss National Science Foundation, international sources, but also companies, and this is a bit where our role actually as an innovation office comes in. And we are very proud to say that since 1996 we started a little bit late with startup foundation at our university compared to maybe Stanford, MIT, Harvard and so on, but we already have more than 100 startups, and in the last 3 years 31, it's probably more now, and more than 350 million raised in the last 4 years. This has also been last night at the discussion with Maria, we heard it's actually much higher. There's a lot of investment now coming in, and I would like to tell you that we are a strong university, not so well known, but we are a very strong university, not just in basic research and in life sciences, but also in innovation. And these are some of the startups just for the last years. I will not go into detail for every startup, but you have the documents, you can look them up. On the left, it's a little bit more the therapeutics companies, so T3 Pharma, Hornet Therapeutics, Chimeo and Matterhorn are all active in immuno-oncology, oncology, drugs, drug development. Matterhorn and Chimeo are funded by Versant Ventures. It's a Boston-based, I think not New York-based VC, one of the world's biggest. They got in their Series A 40 or 30 million Swiss francs. So there's really big companies that are taking off, but only in the last few years this happened. So it's a recent development. And on the right, we have more AOTs. A medical is a robot that can cut bone with a laser. You can see the robot at the top, world's first invention. We have Qnami, is a quantum sensor. So also in quantum tech, we are strong. Deep Breath Intelligence is a breath analytical device that is looking for biomarkers in breath. And then the 3 startups on the right are actually here in Seoul right now. So Bot Neuro is also here in the room. KHIDI will speak later on, and Biomedical is at the moment going around trying to sell because they have to sell. And then when we heard before about Kendall Square, in Basel you can imagine the whole city, because it's quite small, is kind of like a Kendall Square mixed with an old town with medieval buildings. So it's a little bit different. But this is a little bit what comes maybe closest to Kendall Square, which is also a new development. It's the Basel cluster, where we also have our office and our startup incubator. You can see it's also a very colorful place. We try to make it a little bit special also, friendly, really sort of startup style, and also the human touch is extremely important. I think it wasn't mentioned enough today. We analyzed a lot of figures and a lot of numbers, but at the end it's people that make innovation and connections among people. And this is really what we focus on also with our model. You see on the left here, this is an event that we had with also the Swiss Next network. This is the network to promote Switzerland abroad. When they came back to Basel, we brought them all together. This is also still being constructed. You can see on the bottom right how we have a temporary garden, but buildings will come up there in the future. And on the top right, this is the Switzerland Innovation Park, main campus, a huge building by Herzog Dömerow, Basel-based architects, very, very beautiful also. And what I want to show here is basically this is the ecosystem that I showed before in theory come to life. To come a little bit, to continue on the human factor, we collaborate already actively with Korea, and you can see here, these are some photos from when startups came this summer 5 startups from Korea, from Seoul, came to visit us this summer in our innovation ecosystem. And what we did with them together during actually several weeks is different meetings with research and development partners, with large pharma companies, with hospital for clinical validation, and just also to build up their network in Basel. And these startups were Proteina, Neuroped, TomoCube, Thyroscope, and Medisapiens. Some of you may know them. I think some of the startups are a bit more advanced. TomoCube is, I think, quite famous already in Korea. Proteina is a little bit more research-based from Seoul National University. And we are seeing now that these collaborations are actually already continuing. So Proteina met some people from Roche, and they are continuing with this collaboration now. And what I would like to propose now is actually that we scale up this ecosystem that I shared, not just in Basel, but that we combine it with Seoul, with all these different players that we have. We need all of them. We need the innovation ecosystem, we need research, we need universities. We also need the businesses to open up and to collaborate with us. And to actively really also support and do this. And I would like to really offer that we are committed to do this together with partners in Korea, so you can join this collaborative hub that we would like to build. And I think this is the end. You can see here also all the different links. Please follow us on LinkedIn, our activities, and you can get in touch with me either today or via email. Thank you very much. 감사합니다.
감사합니다. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your presentation. So would you please be seated for the discussion, panel discussion, please? 네, 자 이렇게 세션 1에 세 분의
We just heard presentation by 3 speakers. We don't have much time, so we'll go straight into panel discussion. Regarding the 3 presentations that was given, we will invite the 3 speakers and the panelists and moderator up to the stage. Once again, let me call their names. Research Fellow Yongrae, Professor Bahn, Head Christian Schneider, please come up to the stage. We also have invited Director KHIDI of Hongneung Innopolis from KIST. And the moderator is CEO Suyong of IQVIA, Korea. I'll hand over the microphone to CEO Suyong. Hello everyone, I will be working as a moderator of the session 1 panel discussion. Thank you so much to Seoul Metropolitan City Government and KHIDI. Due to the passionate presentation by 3 speakers, we don't have much time for the panel discussion. But let me begin with the Director KHIDI, who is leading the Hongneung Innopolis. And probably he might have something to share with us, the differentiations and the merits of Hongneung Innopolis. Hello everyone. I am Director of Hongneung Innopolis. Seoul recently was nominated as one of the top 10 cities easy to start up the company or business-friendly city, which means that business-friendly environment is one of the foremost priority of Seoul City government. Deep science, deep tech, and also clinical trial-based innovation startup companies. These companies can enjoy these benefits that Seoul City provides. About 7,000 doctors and also college students. Doctor means those who have PhD degrees within the 3 kilometers of the Korean University. This Hongneung Innopolis is located where industry, academia, financial institutions are all located. We are trying to build a huge startup environmental friendly area. So Hongneung Innopolis is the only area within Seoul that are beneficial to digital health or other area, because for the temporary basis, the regulations are exempted and there are numerous tax incentives being provided to Hongneung Innopolis. So we are striving to become one of the top 10 global startup area, ecosystem, or global cluster. However, the space is not sufficient or ample enough to encompass all the companies. So there are some shortcomings to become true sense of the global cluster. But upon listening to the presentation by the head of Basel, University of Basel, I was able to learn a lot. We work together with the Boston and Singapore, the Biopolis, and within the ecosystem, how the startup can begin their business. And we are doing a lot of programs, but with today's conference as an opportunity, we'd like to work closely with Basel. And I'm sure that we can become a great partners, not only for the business, but also to overcome the global challenges. Let me make a comment to the research fellow, Yongrae.
As research fellow Jo has mentioned, to advance bioclusters, he talked about the direction of national plans and intra-cluster, and intra-clusters, like creating synergy between clusters, alpha B projects, and at the national level, he has talked about R&D support and national plans. When we talk about competitiveness of a country or a city, how many global clusters they have is a key standard. Now we are caring more about ecosystem and R&D, and also validation and help. So the collaboration between clusters is becoming increasingly important. So research fellow Jo, Seoul City has 4 clusters. Then can you give us some ideas about how the 4 clusters can collaborate with each other? And one of the speakers talked about integration with AI. And Yangjae has AI, Hongneung has bio. So how can we connect these 2 clusters together? And in Magok, there are large enterprises, but they do not have a startup ecosystem yet. But Hongneung has startups ecosystem. So they can sometimes be a mediator between large enterprises and startups. In the case of global clusters like Basel, they have R&D centers for large companies in them. So can Seoul do something like that? My question to Professor Bahn Joonwoo, you have talked about challenges and opportunities in clinical test area. Korea is number 5 in terms of productivity in the clinical study. But when it comes to we are 15 in terms of going from preclinical trials to clinical trials. So how we can overcome this death valley between the 2 phases is going to be a key challenge. And the academia, industry, and the public coming together for translational study is becoming very important. And having a platform for translation study is important, but we do not have enough funding. And it's important to bring all the stakeholders together so they can work at the same time. In order to let them run at the same time instead of like a marathon, I want to hear about your strategies. I went to Singapore recently, and the doctors, the researchers, professors, companies, they established a consortium, and all the information or output from the consortium is going to be supported by A*STAR. So they have a very dynamic structure, and that consortium was connected to Boston consortium. So we have hospitals in Hongneung, and if we can connect consortium in Hongneung to Singapore to Boston, creating a 3-way belt that is going to be a great achievement. So how can we overcome the death valley? for translational medicine. And last but not least, to Mr. Schneider for impactful innovation. You have shared your ideas about how to establish the effective ecosystem, knowledge ecosystem, innovation ecosystem, business ecosystem. You have connected them. But the challenging part about that was inside the cluster or inside the region, it's difficult to bring knowledge, innovation, and businesses together, even in a organization. They are all decoupled. How can you bring them together successfully? So probably, can you share some ideas about how we can design the best structure to bring the three ecosystems together? And for knowledge ecosystem, we can connect, but innovation ecosystem might be more challenging to connect. So global enterprises get most of the profit. So it's difficult to get large enterprises together. So how can we get all these diverse stakeholders together? Thank you for the questions. The theme of this session was post-COVID bioclusters. We had bioclusters before the COVID, but how can this cluster change after COVID? And what kind of change did COVID bring about? The speed has become more important because infectious disease spreads like fire. And second, we need innovative, disruptive technologies. And how can regulation support that? Messenger RNA is a new paradigm. And thanks to the pandemic, it has picked up. And it is being used much more widely these days. But in terms of ethics and regulation, the regulatory bodies must define their stance. Of course, the innovative companies can decide that, but clusters or government organizations also seem to have a very important part to play. My question is to research fellow Joe. Clusters in Seoul, in order to collaborate with other external organizations, what kind of competencies do you think they should have? It's a great honor to be a part of this panel discussion, and I've learned a lot from other speakers' presentation. The moderator has asked me some questions, and Director Che also asked me some questions. So given those questions, I can say that inside Seoul, if we go one layer deeper, it might have some cluster development strategy. Innopolises can be described as mini clusters, and mini clusters need to collaborate with other mini clusters that would require micro level or tactical level strategies. The biggest strength of City of Seoul is that it can collaborate with other industries. So heterogeneous collaboration can be made possible. So Hongneung has bio-infrastructure, but it can also collaborate with clusters in other districts. It could be called inter-cluster level, intersectoral level collaboration. So having said that, Seoul has very highly advanced infrastructure, and red, bio, green, we are high, but this blue, I made a mistake of calling this not marine, but it's about infrastructure. Seoul is especially strong in terms of infrastructure. So meaning that each sector, diverse sectors, are evenly balanced and evenly advanced. So for biocluster, one of the direction for Seoul is for the Innopolis for bio related activities. They need to specialize in inter-mini cluster collaboration. Second, as the moderator has asked, X Valley. Whenever we make a proposal, it was always started from Osong. Osong is where all the regulatory bodies in Korea are located. It has Ministry of Health, Korea CDC, Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy. So it has representation of all the important regulatory bodies in Korea in Osong. In Osong, in X Valley, Osong is at the center. Osong can be specialized for policy formulation, and driving the policy or implementing the policy can be done there as well. So cluster that is related to policies can be done. Cooperation with such industries can be done in Seoul, and regulatory sandbox have been designated already, and Seoul also has free regulation areas, and Seoul City continuously needs to propose policies for sandbox. Hongneung complex has the infrastructure to function as a sandbox. So that could be the storyline, and based on that, you can create a story and use that story when you're talking to the regulatory bodies. Thank you very much.
말씀 잘 들었습니다.
Thank you. Well, there were a couple of questions that I have prepared in advance, but we are all engaged in science, and scientists must strictly comply with the time. And unfortunately, we have to wrap up. We don't have much time left. So please utilize other time to ask a question. That concludes our first session. Thank you.
아쉽지만
Thank you. We would have to conclude session 1 now. I would like to thank all the participants. And speakers, could you please stay on the stage for